Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Seasons Ebb and Flow. I am Lee Wright. I'm a divorce coach. And today's interview, I'm talking with Jackie Otero. She is a mediator. And we are going to be talking a little bit about mediation and how she works with her clients and the benefits of working with a mediator. And we're also going to talk to her a little bit about her personal experience going through her divorce and some of the takeaways that she tries to help her clients, some of the speed bumps, not make some of those mistakes, and just the lessons learned. So I'm just going to first turn it over to Jackie. Thank you so much for joining me. And if you want to just tell everybody a little bit about what you do.
Great. Well, thank you for having me, Lee. So yes, I'm a certified family mediator through the Florida Supreme Court. So I have my own solo practice. It's called Quarter Tone Mediation, and I'm based in Winter Park, Florida, but I do virtual mediations for the whole state of Florida. And I do everything on Zoom. So this is kind of my world. This is my office. So
Yes.
I can help anybody in any county in Florida. And yeah, I opened my business almost a year ago. I'm almost at my 1 year anniversary. So it's a field that is new to me, but conflict resolution is not new to me. That's something that I've been doing for a really long time. So I actually started off in higher education. I've worked in higher education for the last 17 years. And
Hmm.
one of the most recent jobs that I had, I was the conduct officer for a college. And so all of the conduct issues came to me for resolution. So, as you can imagine, talking with students and staff and faculty all the time about issues that come up, and you think about people who are in college, it's not just about behavioral issues, because, in school, you think about behavioral issues with maybe younger kids. But in
Yeah.
college, you think about all the mental health issues that people are going through. And a lot
Mm.
of people in college, especially in the colleges I've worked at, they're adults, they have families, they have jobs, and they're in school. So they're juggling so much. And
Yeah.
sometimes people reach a breaking point, and then they end up having to go to a conduct meeting to talk about
Mm.
how to correct that. And the approach that I took was always one of trying to just restore them back to a good place, not just
Mm.
penalize them. So I had
Right.
a lot of practice with conflict resolution there before moving into family mediation.
Nice. So, what drew you to decide to become a mediator?
Yeah, there were a few moments I think that stick out in my head. So, when I was the director of a business program, I actually had several attorneys that worked for me because we taught law classes.
Mm.
And I had two attorneys in particular that told me that I was good at conflict resolution and that I should consider being a mediator. And it's like,
Wow.
it's an attorney that you respect and they tell you something like that. It just kind of got filed in the back of my mind. One was actually a friend of mine who was going through a divorce, and she was unsuccessful in her mediation. And
Mm.
it was the holidays. This was a couple years ago. And, I knew both people in the couple, and it was just like, it was paining me to see them arguing just over everything over the holidays. And it was just like ruining their holidays.
Yeah.
I offered to talk to both of them just informally. I was like, well, how about
Right.
I just try to talk to both of you? Because I had a good relationship with both of them. And I ended up just having individual conversations and kind of helping them see that they weren't very far apart from what they
Yes.
both wanted. They just could not communicate with each other.
Hmm.
And so this friend of mine is an attorney, and I kind of helped with that situation. And she told me, you should be a mediator.
Hmm.
And then another attorney who worked for me and who was a professor, I helped resolve a student issue for her one time. She had just a student that was being super difficult in class, very argumentative, very combative.
Mm.
And I got on the phone with the student and I had this wonderful conversation with her. And it all came up about her insecurities and her anxiety over going back to school. And it was all this internal stuff that she was bottling up. And she just needed somebody to listen to her and talk
Mm.
through that. And at the end of that phone call, she sent an apology email to the professor. And the
Wow.
professor calls me and said, "What did you say to her?"
Huh.
And she told me in that phone call, she said, this is during COVID, so we were all working remotely. She said, you should teach conflict resolution. So it was those
Mm.
like two people telling me that. I think
Yes.
I just filed it away in the back of my mind that I was interested in being a mediator. And
Huh.
and I filed my own divorce. My divorce was about 7 years ago. And I was a corporate paralegal like 20 years ago. And so I'm pretty comfortable with legal paperwork. So when I was ready to file my own divorce, I just did all the paperwork myself and went down to the courthouse and filed it.
Good for you.
And I became the default friend that people came to when they were getting a divorce to be like, how did you do that?
Yes.
So that was kind of the other impetus, just going through it myself and then also having the professional practice of conflict resolution. It just seemed like a really natural way to bring it together.
Absolutely. So, since you filed your own divorce, can you tell us some of the lessons that you learned along the way from that experience? Because there are lots of people who consider that and then are just like deer in headlights.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, just tell us a little bit about that process for you and what you learned.
Sure. And I know when I've told people that before, when they've gone through it themselves, they're like, oh, you're crazy. I could never do all that. And I'm like, it's just papers. It's just a lot of papers you have to go through. Well, I will
Mhm.
say, so I got divorced in Seminole County. I'm in Orange County now, but I've kind of grown up in Central Florida. So these are the counties I'm pretty familiar with. Seminole County has the best pro se checklist, I think. So I refer it to everybody, even if they're not in Seminole County.
Ah,
If you're not familiar with the term pro se, that just
right.
means represented. So you're not, represented by an attorney, you're doing it yourself. So anybody who's in Florida, I would recommend that you Google Seminole County's pro se checklist. It's
Thank you.
about 20 documents, and it kind of depends on what kind of divorce you have. If you have children, if you don't have children, there's a few kind of routes, and there's also a paternity checklist. So if you're not married, but you need, a parenting plan or you want to file for child support, that kind of thing, they have
Oh,
these really nicely laid out checklists that give you links to the Florida court documents. And
wow.
the Florida courts use the same templates for the entire state. So they're not really Seminole County specific. Seminole County just has put it in a really nice list that's very accessible.
Mm.
So I always give that to people. Um, Beyond that, I mean, I literally printed everything, notarized it, and brought it to the courthouse and handed it to them. But now I would say, definitely the e-filing system is pretty easy to use too. Don't be
Okay.
intimidated by it. I know that they do still want you to notarize everything on paper, like with actual
Okay.
ink. But then
Yes.
after you have it notarized, you can scan it and then e-file it.
Okay.
Um, One other
So
thing,
that just saves you the trips to the courthouse. So it's
exactly.
kind of like, do you want to spend the time scanning or do you want to just drive to the courthouse?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. I mean, for some reason, I felt a little satisfaction in actually driving to the courthouse and handing it to them. And then the clerk who you hand it to, they'll actually go through everything and kind of make sure that you got everything. So that I liked
Yeah.
having that confirmation too,
I think
versus
I would too. Like,
versus
I
just
feel
upload.
like once it's all out in the ether, also if they say, oh, this one isn't filled out, like the whole process back and
Yes.
forth, it's just, I feel like in person for something like that makes a lot of sense.
Yes. And actually, Orange County at the courthouse there, they have a whole self-help center at their courthouse. So
Huh.
you can go there and actually sit down with somebody and they'll give you the right forms, they'll walk you through everything. So that's a really good resource for people too, especially if you do want to go in person and sit down and talk with somebody. And I know that they do attorney consultations there too. I believe that you do have to pay for them, but they're very cheap. Like I think you can sit
Mm.
down with somebody for 15 minutes and it's a very reasonable fee just to get a little bit of information from somebody.
Right. That's wonderful.
And I was going to say one thing that I also learned. So when I initially filed, I didn't know that you had to get a summons. I thought that I would just file and then hand the paperwork over to my ex because
Mhm.
there was no secret. He knew we were getting divorced. He knew I was filing. And so I
Yes.
just thought, oh, I'll just hand it to him and then we'll go from there. And I did that. I remember handing him the paperwork and, just saying I've initiated this and here's what you've got to do next because, whoever files it is the petitioner and then whoever's Responding is the respondent, so they have to file a response within a certain amount of time. But what I didn't realize is that clock never started for how much time he had to respond because I never did a summons.
Ah,
And so he could have taken all the time in the world if he wanted to. And
okay.
then after I found that out, I went back to the courthouse. Then they sent me to the sheriff's office. To me, it was very confusing, but I did
Yes.
finally have to go to the sheriff and have them actually serve him papers, which I felt was so redundant. I'm like, why do
Yes.
I need to have a sheriff go serve him papers? He already has everything. But it was like we
Mhm.
needed to officially start the clock on the divorce.
Right, exactly. And I do feel like that whole process of having a sheriff bring the paperwork is so it creates like this, okay, you guys are in this possible
Oh,
antagonistic
yeah,
situation.
I agree.
So
Like, who
now
wants
that
the sheriff
you
knocking
have
on their
that,
door and like you've been served? It's
no,
very
when I
dramatic.
got mine, it was so shocking and unexpected. I didn't even know he'd filed. Like, even though we were doing an amicable divorce, he'd gotten not the greatest advice, I think, from his lawyer. So, yeah, it starts this like feeling of like, oh, I need a lawyer up and like
Yes.
just fear.
Totally. It's all fear-based. I agree. And I think that that is probably the biggest issue that I see in our divorce system is just
Yes.
there's so much fear. And I'm in a lot of divorce groups online just because I like to chime in and
Yeah.
give my tips and also tell them what I do. But it's amazing how many people, as soon as divorce is talked about, everybody says, lawyer up, you better get everything you deserve, and you got to know what you're entitled to, and you got to get ready to fight, and don't be afraid to bring them to court. And it's just like everybody's ready for battle.
I know.
It doesn't have to be that way, I'm
Does
convinced.
not.
So
Yes.
if you could get around like not having that sheriff like serve the paper, I learned later that he could have filed a response at the same time as I filed the petition.
Right.
I could have literally handed him the paper to say, check off what your response is,
Yes.
get that
So
notarized.
essentially, both of you went to the courthouse together, or you could have given him the paperwork and he could have gone and done the response at the courthouse.
Exactly. So when somebody voluntarily, submits their own response, you don't have to get that summons. So that's when I work with people now, I typically work with pro se people who have not yet filed. So it's
Yes.
called pre-suit pro se, right? Pre-filing. And
Yeah.
what I do is I help them get all their agreements together. We do a full settlement agreement, a parenting plan, we'll do a child support calculation. And then I will, if they want my help with the other paperwork, I can also walk them through how to file the petition and the answer to the petition. And then
Nice.
the respondent can actually file a waiver of service. So they're basically
Okay.
saying, nope, I got everything I needed, everything is
Right.
settled, and they can request the final judgment right there. And then
Um,
if you do it
mm,
like that, then it's an uncontested divorce. So that's always my goal. I'm like, if I could start over, or if I could advise somebody from the start, I would say file an uncontested divorce if you at all can. And
yes.
I think some people think that they already have to have everything agreed upon. No, that like I understand there are always issues that need to be worked out. That's why you
Mhm.
can come to a mediator like me and I
Yes.
can help facilitate that conversation. And we don't always settle in one session. I mean, that's not
Right.
always realistic. Sometimes it
Mhm.
takes multiple sessions over a little bit of time to help resolve all the issues. I'll
Yes.
say one more thing while I'm on this train of thought. The other thing you can do is you can also file a partial agreement when you file for divorce.
Oh,
And that was one thing I also didn't know. So you don't necessarily have to have a full agreement on all issues. Let's say I have a client and they agree on everything except for two things. Like they're not agreeing on what school zone to use and they're not agreeing on international travel because those are
okay.
a couple of issues that come up. So let's say everything else is settled. I'll write up a full, well, not a full, I'll write up a partial agreement. We'll do everything. They can file that and then they can ask the judge basically just to rule on those two things. So they don't have to go through a full trial. They can just have a hearing and the
Mhm.
judge might ask some questions and usually the judge will try to get them to agree to something even in a hearing
Right.
before they make a ruling on their behalf. But I mean,
Okay.
that can be another good way to do it. So it's not quite an uncontested divorce, but it's a at least a partial agreement. That gets you a long way still through the court system.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if
So
you
the,
can avoid trial in any way,
oh,
avoid it. Like
yeah.
that, to me, that's the last straw. That is like the final
Mhm.
thing that you do when there's just no other option left. Because
Yeah.
I have sat in on divorce trials. Thankfully, I didn't have to do one myself, but I have sat in
Hmm.
on some, and it is so painful. The
Oh, I
level
can't even
of
imagine. I
yeah, the level
know.
of detail that is scrutinized for each person, every parenting decision, every text message, just it's a brutal process, not to mention
Mhm.
super expensive. So I
Yeah.
would try everything before you say you want to go to trial.
Absolutely. I didn't know that you could have a judge just help you with like one or two things. That's really interesting. Like we finished everything in one long mediation session, but I look back and our lawyers were sitting there all through mediation and it was so unnecessary. The mediator worked with each of us very well. She was a very experienced mediator, and his attorney was giving him a lot of just encouraging him to go to court. So
Mhm.
not an effective attorney. So, but if you have a good mediator, I just think back and I'm like, how much money we spent to have the lawyers sit there and do almost
Mhm.
nothing. And
Yeah.
yeah, oh,
Go ahead.
I love when I have clients who come to me before they've hired any professionals so that I
Mhm.
can educate them about hiring a mediator and maybe having consulting attorneys or learning about collaborative divorce before they hire an attorney. Because some of these attorneys, some are wonderful and some really like fuel the fire and
Mhm.
create that very antagonistic system. And once it's started and it starts to snowball, backpedaling from that is so hard.
Yes, I agree. So, in my experience, even though I did start the process myself, my ex-husband did get an attorney. And so once he had an attorney, I actually got a very scary letter from his attorney.
Mhm.
And it was sort of asking for everything in the moon. It was like, oh, he's going to go for full custody and child support and alimony and all these things. It was basically like every possible thing that could be fought for that was in the letter. And I was like so freaked out by it that
Yes.
I went and talked to an attorney. And I was like, well, I'm not going to go up against a family attorney when I've never done this. I don't know this system. So I
Yeah.
did end up having to get an attorney, but then we did settle in one mediation, kind of
Okay.
like you. It was one long mediation, and you have to
Hmm.
pay your attorney to sit there. You got to pay the mediator. So it's a very expensive session. Um,
Very.
but I was thankful that my attorney, her whole goal was to keep me out of court and keep me out of trouble.
Yes.
So I appreciated that. She was kind of my reality check of like, if I don't agree to this, at what level then will I agree to it later on after spending way more money? Or,
Exactly.
so she was good at giving me like a healthy reality check of like, this is why you probably want to settle now, even though it's not exactly what you want, because it's
Yes.
only going to be worse and more expensive down the road. So I feel
Yes.
like I kind of saw both sides. I did the pro se beginning, and then I did the mediation with attorneys. Um, I mean, if there's ever an attorney that's encouraging you to go to trial right off the bat, I just feel like
Hmm.
that's a huge red flag.
Oh, for sure.
And I
Yeah.
recommend people go to attorneys all the time because there's definitely a time and a place for attorneys,
Hmm.
but not every case needs them. So
Absolutely.
the people that tend to find me tend to want to stay out of court and they want to settle. So
Yes.
I'm like, nobody really just seeks out a private mediator before a divorce unless they want to settle. Like they're very
Yeah.
motivated to settle and get everything done. And I'm like, if
Yes.
you don't want to settle, then don't come to me, right? Like,
Hmm.
go hire a lawyer and start gathering your evidence, right? So I think
Hmm.
it's a time and a place, and every case is different. But before I have anybody sign an agreement, I always recommend that they have an attorney look it over
Yeah.
because
I
I'm
agree.
like,
I
this is
think.
a legal document. It's going to govern your life for a long time. You know,
Hmm.
at least get a consultation, have somebody take a look at it. And I felt in my mediation, I was very pressured to sign, sign, sign. Like It's
There in that
in
session?
that room, in that, we were in a
Oh,
physical room together. And it was like, if you don't sign now, and I've had other mediators tell me, oh, I never leave the room without a signature. And I'm like, I don't do that. But I also,
yeah,
since I work with self-represented people too, I want them to feel like they have time to go get a consultation, to go have it looked over,
yeah,
a second opinion. I'd rather them take time and really think about it, even if there are a couple more issues that we've got to work out after the fact,
right.
and pressure them to sign right there, and then they feel awful about it afterwards.
Yeah, yeah. I see both sides. We didn't sign right there. There were a few open-ended items, but his lawyer, who I think was so frustrated that we were working together because I think he just wanted us to go to court. Another thing I feel like is I think unfortunately my ex hired someone who advertised kind of like I can ensure you won't have to pay alimony or anything, and that's really dependent on the situation. But if you hire someone who says across the board I can guarantee this for you, like that's false advertising. And
Mhm.
so one, he was not well prepared by his lawyer when he got into mediation, which put him kind of on like clueless waters. He just didn't have any knowledge. So
Mhm.
it didn't set him up for success in mediation. And
Mhm.
so I feel like the type of professional you hire is really important from the get-go to set the
Mhm.
tone, but also to educate you in the right way. Because they could encourage you to go to court, and then you go to court and you find out that everything that you disagreed with in mediation, the judge is going to say that that makes sense. So you want to hire professionals, if you are using attorneys, who are going to set you up for success.
Absolutely. And I'll give you another example when it's a great time to bring an attorney in. So I had some clients where, we were doing it all pre-suit, and we went through the whole parenting plan, and that went pretty well, but I think they both knew things were going to get real sticky with the finances. So we did the parenting plan in one session. It took, I think, a little over 3 hours, and we got that done. And then I started kind of setting an agenda for the next session just so I knew kind of what we were walking into. And I always ask, what are the major issues that you'd like to resolve for the next
Mhm.
session? Just so I can get an idea of where we're going.
Yeah,
And I knew that alimony was part of the discussion because they had both brought it up, but they both had no idea where to start. It was like, one didn't know what to ask for, the other one didn't know what to expect to pay. And you could tell that they just both felt very nervous about that conversation.
yeah,
And so we ended up taking a 2-week break between mediation sessions. And I said, I want you both to go consult with an attorney. And I want
yeah.
you to ask all the questions that you have about alimony. And I want you to think of what would be a starting point for that conversation. Because
Mhm.
part of the mediator ethics and guidelines are that I cannot give legal advice. That is one of
Right.
the pillars of mediation. I cannot give them any legal advice. So I can help them strategize. Now, what I will do, and I did for this couple, I can pull up the Florida statute. Like, I'll share my screen and I'll pull up the alimony statute and I'll say, well, let's look at it together. And we can
Mhm.
see right there in the statute what it says, what the
Yeah,
guidelines are, what's considered a short term versus a long term marriage, the
right.
different terms and percentages that are involved. So I can at least inform them, but I can't interpret it for them. So
Hmm.
I could tell that they just needed somebody to give them some advice before they came back. And I think
Yes,
that's a great time to just pay for a 30-minute or 1 hour consultation with an attorney, you know,
definitely.
get help with your strategy. So at least you walk in knowing what maybe your starting point is. Um,
Hmm.
because I can't really give you that starting point. That's a little too much for me to suggest as a mediator.
Yes,
And I ended up taking them in different rooms and just talking to them about, so how did your consultation go? Tell me about that.
right.
Right. So
Nice.
if I'm asking them, I'm not strategizing with them. I'm just asking them, you tell me, how did it go? What are you thinking about it?
Mhm.
What would be a good starting point? And that's how
Right.
I got the conversation started with them.
Nice. And then you guys were able to come to agreement. It's
Yeah,
wonderful.
I mean, I don't want to jinx it by saying it out loud, but so this is my first year of business in family mediation. I've had 17 clients this year, and I have settled 100% so far.
It's
So
wonderful.
knock on wood, I want to keep the streak alive. But I always
Yeah.
say because people who come to me are motivated to settle. I don't think
Hmm.
it's because I have some special technique. I think the
Right.
type of people that come to a pro se mediator before they file divorce, they're motivated to settle. And
Yes.
if you want to settle and both people do, usually we can get there.
Yes. Yeah. I think if both parties are rational, knowledgeable, like have done some research and, like you said, looked at the statute, aware of how long they've been divorced, maybe talked to friends who have gone through the process. I gathered a lot of information just by pinging different people who I knew who had gone through it. I learned a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I feel like you have to be an advocate for yourself.
Absolutely.
And even if you have attorneys, don't just rely on them. Like, advocate for yourself.
Yeah. I actually have a story about that because I had that same thought while I was in mediation during my own divorce, because that was back in the day when we were still doing all physical mediations. I do feel like most of them tend to be virtual now.
Yeah.
But we were in separate rooms. They put us in separate rooms from the very beginning, and
Mhm,
we were fairly amicable.
mhm,
This sounds, a little weird, but like we hugged at the end of mediation.
mhm. Yeah, I
And
think
I
that's
mean, so I mean,
beautiful.
like we could have conversations and we wanted the best
Yes.
for our kids. Like there were still good vibes there, even though
Yes.
we knew we could not be married anymore. But they put us in separate rooms from the very beginning. And I kept getting these offers from the other room that I was like, I know this isn't coming from him. I can
Yeah.
tell because I've known this man, 30 years. I mean, literally I knew my ex-husband since kindergarten.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I know him. This is not him. This is not what
Mhm.
he's asking for. This is his lawyer giving him what I think is strange advice, like kind
Yes.
of over the top advice. And
Yes.
so I want to say it was like the first 2 hours of our mediation, we did not get anywhere because we were just
Yeah.
in separate rooms going back and forth with these weird offers. And I asked my attorney and I asked the mediator, I said, can I just go talk to him? And they kind of like had to meet without me and like discuss, like, are we going to let her talk to him?
Yeah.
And they came
That's
back to me,
so,
which is so funny. I'm like, this is a man that I have children with. Like, I
yes.
could talk to him, but I get it. It's a whole system. And so
Hmm.
after they consulted with everybody, they came back and they said, okay, you can go talk to him. And I just went in the room with him and I said, can we just talk for a minute? He's like, of course. And we just start talking. And I'm like, okay, I thought we had already agreed that we were going to do it this way and this. And he goes, yeah, that's right. I agree. And I'm like, so why are we arguing about this and paying two attorneys and a mediator to argue
Yes.
something for us that we don't need to argue about? And he was
Hmm.
like, I agree. And then we finished the rest of the mediation in the same room together.
Good for you.
So I
That's
use that
amazing.
example because I'm like, this is your mediation. This is your divorce. You're paying all these people to be here to serve you.
Right.
So make sure that they are serving you. Like
Yes.
the thing is, people are so scared about divorce and they're so intimidated by the whole thing. It's very
Hmm.
intimidating walking into your own divorce mediation. Like
I
it's a scary thing. And
agree.
I think just out of fear, they let the professionals take over.
Totally. Yeah, I
And
can
that doesn't
relate.
always serve them, So I'm
It
like,
does
it's like
not.
you're the boss of your mediation. If something isn't going the way you want to, guess what? It's all voluntary. Like even
Yes.
if you're court ordered to mediation, you get a check mark if you just show up. Like you get
Hmm.
it for going to mediation even if you show up. So you can leave at any time, you can take a break, you don't have to sign anything. Like you're the boss, you know?
Right.
So
Yeah,
that's
this
what
is
I like to
your
tell people.
mediation.
It's your mediation. You're the one paying for these people to be here in this room together.
Right. And if you feel like your professionals are pushing you towards antagonizing, like you said, I know this person. Like, I know, and you might not be getting along right now, but if you
Yeah.
feel like they're being given very bad advice, like sometimes just having a conversation with them, either
Mhm.
before mediation, just reminding them the agreements that you made, like, we're going to do this amicably, we're going to prioritize our kids. We
Hmm.
want to save our co-parenting relationship. But I also remind my clients that the like few months that you're in that like deep divorce where you're like around mediation time and just after, emotions are so raised that
Oh, yeah.
yeah, you might not be super amicable or want to be in the same room with that person, but those emotions settle over time, and
Mhm.
that you will rebuild that co-parenting relationship. So be patient, like time heals as well. So
Totally agree. I know people who have done mediation. I have friends who have done mediation. I want to say like a 8 to 9 hour mediation session, walking out with zero agreements on anything. And then they wait 6 months and then they go back and they settle. So
nice.
sometimes it's just exactly what you're saying. Emotions are too high. Like
Mhm.
I know we've talked about this before. Divorce is a business transaction, and
Yeah,
marriage is a legal partnership. It's like starting a business with somebody.
yeah.
I say I always wish that it was just as hard and just as much paperwork to get married as it is to get divorced. Because you think about like, what does it take to get married? I think I signed one document. I mean,
Yes,
I don't
totally.
think there was much more. It's so easy to get married, but it is
Right.
so hard to untangle it all at the end, you know?
Yes.
And so, of course, it's easy for us to say this because we're at a distance from it. It's like, oh, you've got to go in with a level head and, treat it like a
Right.
transaction, treat it like a business deal. It never feels that way when you're in it. And
No.
I agree, like that period of time, like basically leading up to deciding to get divorced and then actually starting the process till you're finally divorced, like that is the hardest time.
Mm-hmm. It is.
It is
Yeah.
like that being in limbo. And mine was quick. Mine was like 6 months long. So
Nice.
comparatively speaking, that's a quick divorce. It felt like years.
Yes. I know it does. Just time slows. It's so
It
stressful.
does. So, and I totally agree with you. Everything does get better over time. And
Yeah.
I do think once you decide to get divorced, like I tell people, take your time deciding to get divorced. Like it
Hmm.
took me 3 solid years to make that
Yes.
decision. It really
Yeah.
did. Like I really felt like I had to exhaust every possible option before I settled on that decision. But once
Yeah.
I decided, then I'm like, then don't linger. Don't let it drag on for
Mhm.
years because that's
Right. Then rip off the Band-Aid
like, let's
because
get it done.
I totally agree. Do you want to tell us a little bit about, because I have clients in that stay or go phase for a year or two, and and I remind them it's okay. Like this is a big decision. Do not rush it. But do you want to tell us a little bit about your process of how you finally got to that decision over those years?
Yeah. I mean, I do think my situation was a little bit unique. I mentioned that I knew my ex-husband since kindergarten. I was very entwined with his whole family. Like I love his sister. I loved his parents. Like we just did everything together and we knew each other for a long time. But he was suffering from addiction. And
Mm,
that was the main catalyst of what dissolved our marriage in the end. And what I think is so unique about dealing with addiction in the course of a marriage is you love the person. Obviously, I mean, I still have a lot of love for him, and I always still felt like he's a good person.
yeah.
Even to this day, I'm like, and he's still suffering. He's still
Mhm.
suffering quite a bit. Like it's only gotten worse since we got divorced 7 years ago. And it's very sad. But it was like I struggled with, do I divorce somebody who has an illness?
Yeah.
Because when I took my vows, I meant them,
Mhm.
and I felt like, okay, if he had cancer, would I be leaving him? No, of course not. I would be like
Yeah.
seeing him through that struggle and supporting him. And so addiction to me, it's not like you're a bad person because you're an addict, you have an illness.
Mhm.
And I saw it very close up and it got really bad. Like I said, like the last 3 years were really, really rough. He was in and out of rehab. He was in and out of AA, getting sponsors. He was trying a lot of different things. I think it was because I made him do it, to be honest. I was sort of like, managing his addiction, which is also not a great place to be in, which
Mm-mm.
I've learned after many years.
Yeah.
But I was sort of like always kind of trying to be that catalyst to try to get him better because I was trying to keep our family together. It's like
Yeah.
I had the biggest motivation to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And it was 3 years of real deep, dark addiction time and
Mm.
in and out of rehab, in and out of jobs, just big roller coaster.
Yeah.
I remember I read a book. I think it was called Should I Stay or Should I Go?
Mm-hmm.
It was like, I need a formula. I need a calculation to like tell me when is the right time to call this.
Right.
And of
Right.
course, like, and I was going to therapy and everything. I was going to individual therapy and, couples counseling too, because I thought we could just work through everything. And I remember reading this book and like kind of making, columns of like, do I stay? Do I go? Writing everything down. And I still was like, I don't know. And I will say what finally brought me to the point was my house was feeling like it was chaos. It felt like my
Yeah.
house was utter chaos. Like I would come home from work and I would not know what I would be walking into.
Mm.
My kids were little, like they were in, let's see, they were in preschool, going into elementary school at this time.
Yeah.
And I think I had to make the decision for them. I was like, I need them to grow up in a more stable home.
Mm-hmm.
And even though it's like you're trying to stay together because you think that's a stable family, is like
Right.
a two-parent house.
Yes.
But I think I had to come to the recognition that the more stable life for them would be the one parent house, that the one
Mm-hmm.
unstable parent. And so I think that's what ultimately did it. I was like, I think my kids need a different environment to grow up in.
Mm-hmm.
And I also kind of in my head, I gave myself one more round of rehab and sobriety and rehab.
Okay.
I told myself, I was like, I'm going to do one more round. I'm going to give it one more shot. It was leading
Mm.
up to our 10-year wedding anniversary. I remember because I was like, we're going to make it to 10. We're going to, I was like, I'm going to,
Yeah.
but I was like, if we do one more of this roller coaster, I'm out. And sure
Yeah.
enough, it happened. And we ended up divorced right before our 10-year anniversary.
Wow.
And so it was awful. It was I mean, it's the hardest time of my life. But I always tell people everything since then has been better. It's
That's
like my house is calm. I think it's a great home for my kids. Unfortunately, I don't have their dad as a co-parent. He's just not able to do it anymore. We did try in the beginning to do some co-parenting and some time sharing. It just it wasn't feasible.
mm,
So my kids actually just saw him for the first time in 2 years. They saw him a couple weeks ago and they had a nice like 1 hour reunion. So
oh,
it's like, we still care about him. And it's like we wish him the best, but we can't be in his addiction with him.
right. Yeah, you can't
Oh,
enable that he has to be able to make whatever changes or choices for
yeah.
him.
And I had to come to that resolution that this is on him. Like I can't make
Hmm.
him get out of this.
Yeah.
So we
Yeah,
still
it's so
hope
hard.
we still hope someday he'll come out of it and maybe come back and want to be in their lives again. But it's
Mm.
just, that's not where it's at right now.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a accepting that and getting your head around that is a process, I'm sure. I'm
Oh yeah.
sure it's very difficult to make peace with.
Oh yeah, for sure. But we're in a good place. It's like we all wish he was better, but we also just know it's not up to us. So I think we're in a
Yeah.
good place and my kids and they're in middle school now. We talk very openly about it, and I tell them, I'm like, there's no secrets here. If you want to ask me any questions or if you want to know
Mm.
anything, just ask.
Yeah.
We talk very openly about addiction and mental illness and you know, alcoholism. Like we've talked about all those topics. And I tell you what, those were never topics I knew anything about growing up. Thankfully, I
Yeah.
mean, I'm happy I didn't have to know about them.
Absolutely.
But, I didn't know anything about this stuff. So I feel like my kids, of course, I wish that they had a dad around who was healthy. But man,
Hmm.
they are going into the world knowing a lot of stuff.
Yes, I
And
agree.
hopefully that serves them. Hopefully, it's like
Mhm.
their eyes are more open to the world than I think mine ever were.
Yeah,
Better
I
or worse?
100% relate to that. I I came from my parents were together, but it wasn't the healthiest relationship, but I had no idea that that was all I knew. And I
Mm,
feel like I didn't understand the complications of marriage, of relationships. I just saw like, oh, it's okay. Like you just stay together and like
mhm.
that maybe is what marriage looks like. And I feel like I was very naive. And now I feel like my children understand the gravity of when you decide to marry someone. Like that is a huge decision. And it's not just because it's fun and feels good. There's so many other things to consider and understanding their household that they grew up in. Like, is that something that you would want your household to look like? Those were things I never even thought about. And we met
Amen.
young. I didn't
Mm.
like, we were kind of each other's first long-term relationship. Now I'm like to my kids, you need to have a few. If you have to take the risk of losing someone. If they're the right person, you'll come back to them. But if you meet someone at 15, 16, 18, like you need other experiences before you can say this is the person for the rest of my life. And so it's unfortunate that I had to go through those life lessons, but now at least I'm giving them the opportunity to learn from the things that I didn't know.
Oh, I give my kids all kinds of unsolicited advice in that area.
Yeah.
Like I have told them, I'm like, do you want to hear my real perspective on marriage now? And they're like, yeah, tell us. Like they're interested for whatever reason.
Yes.
And I was
Yeah.
like, well, here's what I think. So I was a sociology major in college. I studied culture and society. And I remember actually I took a class called the sociology of heterosexuality. And it was about how every piece of media you watch from the time you're a kid watching Disney movies up to like rom-coms, it all is programming you to want the same thing. And it's like how many TV series and movies end with a white wedding? You know?
Yeah.
And it's like, that's the end goal for everybody is to get married and then you can start a family and you can have this whole life, right? So it's like, it is so deeply programmed in us. And it's all a societal construct. Like,
Yeah.
and I'm sorry to my kids that they have to hear me say this stuff, but I'm like,
Mhm.
marriage, it's a made up thing. It's it's a made up thing that society does.
Yeah.
It's a legal contract that you sign to basically start a business with somebody, and the business is the marriage. And then
Right.
everything that you make and all the debts that you incur, it's of that entity, and you are equally
Mhm.
responsible for all of it. And I just never thought of it in a critical way. I just thought, I want to have kids. I want to be a mom. I want to be married. And I got married at 27. It's not that young, but it's still
Yeah.
not a ton of life experience. But
Yes.
I'm like, nobody talks about how you can have kids and you can have a house and you can have the whole life you want without the legal document. So when I
Hmm.
learn about people who are living that whole life without it being legally formalized, I'm like, they're so brilliant. I was like, they're just together because they want to be together.
Right.
And if that
Right.
ever changes, like, yes, I respect marriage. My parents are still married. I mean, they have a very successful marriage. So it works for some people.
Yeah.
And I would do it differently if I was starting all over.
Right. Right. I do think though that the challenge is like if you don't marry, but you have kids together and a house together, and you do have to uncouple if
Mm.
that happens, it is just as complicated in some respects, don't you think? Or because you're
Yeah.
still having to divide everything and
Sure,
parent.
sure. And I mean, you could still end up in court over those property divisions. It's probably just gonna be small claims court, not family court, right?
Hmm.
Um, I do just feel like you just have so much more flexibility. And I know I've argued with people about this before because a lot of people are like, oh, there's protection when you get married. And I was like, well, I wasn't protected by marriage, not in my
Right.
situation.
Right.
My situation, I really felt like I only got the bad end of the deal.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I had to give up so much of that 401k I had been building. And, I always felt like I paid for every dime of that house, yet I had to give him half the profits. And I get it
Right.
now. I get why it exists like that.
Of
But at the
course.
time, it just felt like I was being stripped of so many things. So I felt like I was being punished. It
Yes.
felt like I was the one trying to make it work, yet I was
Yeah.
very financially punished by it.
Yeah.
That's a really
I
hard thing to
think,
get over.
yeah. I think when it comes to addiction, it that is such a very unique, not unique, but very specific situation that the partner who is holding everything together
Yeah,
really is taking on so much more of the burden of the
right.
family, the business,
Oh,
the
yeah.
house. And so, yeah,
Because I
when
took
you,
on all his debts. I took care of all of his debts. And
uh,
it just felt like I had to take responsibility for everything in order to leave.
yeah,
That was my
yeah,
way
that
out.
is a really hard
Yes,
pill to swallow.
it was. It was very hard. But, I was also like, I have a good job. Like, I'm going to be okay.
Mm-hmm.
Because, looking back on it now more objectively, like the addict in that situation also needs to be protected. Like, what if I just left him with absolutely nothing? You know,
Yeah,
so he did get, a lot of funds that
right. To
I had
kind of
saved
give
up.
him a runway if he could change his,
Exactly. He did
yeah,
have at least a financial opportunity to get a new start.
right, right.
Unfortunately, you can guess how that went.
Mhm.
Like he did cash out the 401k money and then it was gone. So it's
Yeah,
like, I agree with it now in theory that like,
yeah,
that parent does need financials
mhm.
to get going. And you just
Yeah,
hope that it actually works out for them and it doesn't always.
yeah. Have you found that, like, from your personal experience, especially with addiction, that you have a unique ability to help clients?
I do because I've been there. I know exactly I don't know what it's like to be the addict, but I know what it's like to live in a household that is dictated by addiction.
Yes.
Actually, kind of coincidentally, my very first clients were this wonderful couple that one of them was right out of rehab and they were very amicable. They had agreed to separate, they had agreed to get divorced, but they did it in a really loving way. It was very inspiring to see because you could
Mm,
tell that they were both really good parents and they wanted the best. And it really helped that the addict admitted their own limitations. And I think that that's what you need when we talk about going into a successful mediation, it's about taking some level of responsibility and having a reality check for what's best in that situation for the family. And they both had that. And so I wrote a parenting plan that had three different levels of time
mm,
sharing. And I advocate for this for people who are in recovery because all I ever want is to see somebody come out of recovery and be successful and stay in
yes.
recovery and be able to be a great parent. Like I listened to Armchair Expert with Dak Shepard, and he talks a lot about his recovery and his relapses over the years and his addictions. And man, when he talks about like the kind of parent he is to his girls, it just warms my heart because I'm like,
Yeah.
we need good examples of how it can be successful too.
Yes.
You know,
Absolutely.
like addiction has has a very bad reputation out there, and it's but I try to not blame the addiction or I try to not blame, the parent. And I
Right.
give a lot of respect to people that are in recovery and really trying to get better.
Mhm.
So I would recommend, and I've done this for people, kind of a stair step approach to parenting plans.
Okay.
When somebody's coming right out of rehab, it doesn't make any sense for anybody to go straight to 50-50 time sharing.
Yeah.
That
Mhm.
it's You want to set them up for success. So in this instance, this particular parenting plan, we kind of had the beginning phase, which was okay, just starting off in recovery. Maybe you're in sober living. Maybe you are just getting like an apartment or have roommates or something like that. Let's just say, what actually makes sense? Maybe just some daytime visits at first. Maybe some, regular weekends together. Maybe there's a grandparent's house where you can spend the night together at a grandparent's house. So let's like start slow, right?
Yes.
And then usually I would set like a time frame on that. Like if that is successful for the first 90 days, maybe, then we can transition into phase two, which is okay, maybe now they have their own apartment with an extra bedroom or something like that. You can set it as like a time frame to reach the next milestone, or
Right.
or something happens, like you get an apartment that has two bedrooms.
Right.
Right. And
Right.
when that kicks in, you go to the next phase, which could be every other weekend, plus a weeknight or something like that. So you're kind of building on that.
Yes.
Once you have that for, let's say, 6 months and things are going smoothly, then you transition to 50-50 time sharing. And if you
Mm,
involve the kids too, I mean, obviously it depends on the age of your kids and all of that, but
right.
you got to kind of let them in on the plan a little bit. It's like, well,
Hmm.
here's what we both want. We both want you to have time with both of us.
Right.
We're not going to be married anymore, so we're going to live separately. So here's what that's going to look like. We're going to first start here, and then we're going to build up to this. So it's like, the less uncertainty for the kids, the better, so at least they
Yeah.
know that there's some goals in place and
Right.
you hope that everything goes smoothly and that you kind of graduate to 50-50 time sharing.
Hmm.
But I think if you just go straight into it, like there's just too much room for error and
Yes.
it
And you
becomes
want to set yourself up for success, not fail and then have to retry. And for the
exactly.
kids, the safe feeling safe, like especially if they know the one parent has struggled, they
Yes.
might, even though they adore and love that parent, not
Yes.
feel 100% safe that that parent can fully take care of them. So you want to give the kids the chance to build that confidence on,
Yes.
yeah, for everybody.
Absolutely. And it's like, when you have somebody that's going through rehab and all of that, it's like there's so much trust that's broken. It's like the trust between the parents is broken, the trust with the kids, like there's just a lot of chaos in it. So I think
Yeah.
just I like to use a parenting plan as a tool to give people structure that they can like find success within.
Right.
I think that's really important. So that's actually one thing I'm really thinking that, going into, 2025 and thinking about my business and how I want to do things. I'm really excited about working more with people in recovery. Like that just
Mm,
feels like a very personal mission to me. And
yeah.
going all psychoanalyst on it, like, oh, I couldn't fix my situation, so I can help other people with theirs. Like,
Right.
it is
Right.
like, that's so gratifying though to see somebody kind of come out of it successfully and be able to
Yes.
parent. Like, that's
Hmm.
amazing. And then what a gift to the
I
kids
know. To the
to
whole
have.
family.
Yeah, it is. It really is a gift. So I feel very lucky that I can work with families like this. And I just
Hmm.
feel like a very personal drive for it.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that that is for someone who, for a family that's going through that, to work with someone who can personally understand it, but also say, like, these, let's make a plan for success for you guys, is really just makes everyone feel more comfortable.
Right. And I think addicts a lot of time feel punished for their
Mm,
actions. And I never
yeah.
want a parenting plan to feel like a punishment. It's not like, oh, well, you screwed up, so now you've got to go
Right.
with this. It needs to be set up to more like let me lay out a path that you can
Hmm.
follow towards your goal.
Yes.
Like let's not punish you, but let's kind of turn that around into like
Right.
up for
And
success.
each milestone, like, you get rewarded. So there's like incentive if you really do want to get to 50-50, whether it's timeline or milestone, like
Mhm.
that you follow this plan and you get what you want.
Exactly.
So
So it takes
instead
away a
of
lot of
the,
the uncertainty, right? Because anytime somebody is in addiction, there's just so much uncertainty.
yeah.
I know that feeling of like, I don't know if my kids are getting picked up today from preschool. Like I would get calls from the preschool director, like nobody picked up your kids today. So it's like I know what it's like to live in that uncertainty
Mm,
area. And I'm like, even for people who are still married and trying to get through recovery or rehab or anything, I actually met with a therapist recently who suggested to me, why don't you do parenting plans for people who are still intact with their
Mhm.
marriage and their family, but kind of offer the same thing, like give them a path to kind of
Yeah.
reintegrate into the family. And I'm like, that's brilliant. Nobody talks about that.
No,
You
that
know,
is
so
that's so
I just
true.
I think there's so much opportunity to set people up for success, you know?
Yes. Oh, I love that. Well, Jackie, I don't want to take too much of your time. This is like so informative, and I really appreciate you sharing so much about your own personal story and um, just really sharing how you can help other people. These types of things are so encouraging, especially when it comes to a topic like addiction, which a lot of people keep so close to their chest and feel a
Yeah.
little isolated with that situation. So just
Yes.
hearing someone who's gone through it and come out the other end and is supportive to help other people, that's a really wonderful thing that you're offering.
Thank you so much. And it's a little liberating to talk about it because when you are dealing with addiction in your home, you don't talk about it to many people.
Yeah.
Like you said, it's kind of like something people feel a lot of shame about. And
Yeah.
you kind of keep it close. You don't let a lot of people in that circle. And so
Yeah.
it's a little bit liberating to talk about it.
Hmm.
With some level of objectivity. But
Yes.
I'm sure that so many families have been suffering through that same thing that I have. So I'm like,
Hmm.
I want to at least give people a shot for success,
Yeah.
whether it's staying in
Yeah.
the marriage or sometimes the better thing is to leave the marriage. And
Hmm.
either way, you just want great parents in the mix. Like that's really the goal.
Yeah, it's so true. Like protecting the kids, they aren't the ones who chose to be involved in a divorce, to have parents who have challenges. And so you just want to protect them if you can.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. And thank you for all the great questions. And you made it very easy to talk about. And it's a very difficult subject that I don't talk about very much. So thank you.
Oh, well, it's great talking to you. And I will let you know. Also, I just want to let you know, well, first, if you want to tell people where they could find you.
Oh, yes. So I do mediation videos. I record lots of informational videos on social media. So you can find me on social media at Jackie O Mediator. I'm on TikTok, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, all the places, YouTube. And then my website, my company is Quarter Tone Mediation, and my website is qtmediation.com.
Okay.
And if it's an appropriate time, I'd love to plug that you and I are doing a webinar together. And
Yes,
so
that's right.
if you happen to be watching this video before January 27th, 2025, we are doing a free webinar. We've decided to join forces, Lee being a divorce coach and myself being a mediator. We just thought it would be really good to come together and answer people's questions. So we'll be announcing more details soon and registration information, but it's called Starting Fresh in 2025, Managing Your Divorce with Confidence. So we want to empower you and answer your questions and help you, get off to a fresh start. So more details coming soon, Lee, and I'm looking forward to doing that with you.
Yes, me too. And I will make sure all of those details about the webinar and all your links are in the show notes.
Okay, fantastic.
Yeah. All right. Well, I will see you very soon. And it was a wonderful conversation.
Thank you, Lee.